The lunchbox hit the pavement and burst open, and white rice scattered across the concrete like something spilled from a wound. The little boy did not cry. That was the part that made the other parents look away. 6 years old, and he had already learned that crying made everything worse. He crouched down and began picking up the rice grain by grain with small careful fingers, as if he could put the whole morning back together if he was only fast enough. Behind him, a car door opened. The temperature of the parking lot changed. A black sedan, long and low and polished until the sky bent inside it. The man who stepped out wore a coat that cost more than the school building, and the two men who got out after him did not walk beside him. They walked behind him. That was how everyone knew. Mothers pulled their children back by the shoulders. A teacher discovered something very important on her clipboard. Nobody spoke. The man crossed the lot without hurrying. Men like that never hurry, because hurrying means somebody else set the schedule. He stopped in front of his son. "Get up," he said. The boy got up. He was still holding a handful of rice. "Look at me." The boy looked at his shoes. And the man raised his hand. It happened slowly, the way terrible things always do when you are watching and cannot stop them. The hand went up. The boy closed his eyes and turned his cheek in advance, and that small practiced movement told the whole parking lot everything it did not want to know. Then a woman stepped into the space between them. Gray cleaner's uniform. Mop bucket in one hand, bag of trash in the other. She had walked out of that building to empty a bin and walked into the most dangerous man in the city, and she did not step back. She set the bucket down on the concrete and looked up at him. She was not tall. She had to look up a long way. And she said one sentence. "Hit your son one more time, and I promise you will pay for it." Nobody breathed. One of the men behind him reached inside his jacket. The teacher on the steps covered her mouth. The woman did not look at the jackets. She kept her eyes on his face, and her hands shook so badly that she pressed them flat against her thighs to hide it, and still she did not move. Everybody in that lot expected blood. Instead, the man in the coat lifted 2 fingers, and his men stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that was not anger, and that was somehow more frightening. Then he crouched, picked up the fallen lunchbox, closed it, put it into the boy's hands, and guided him gently into the car. He looked back at her once. He got in. And the black sedan pulled out of the lot and disappeared into the traffic of Seoul. She stood there almost a full minute before her legs let her sit down on the curb. That should have been the last day of her life. Instead, it turned out to be the first day of his. Welcome to Hidden Fortune Tales. Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are sitting right now, because we love knowing who is out there listening. Hit subscribe and hit that like button, because it helps this story reach the person who needs it tonight. Understand something about the man who drove away. Nobody had spoken to Tae-sung like that in 20 years. Not a rival. Not a police captain. In 20 years, the only people who raised their voices at that man were people who had already decided they were finished with living. A cleaner did it with a mop bucket at her feet, and she walked away untouched. But that is not the strangest part. Because somebody else was watching. Across the city, in an office with the blinds drawn, another man watched security footage of that same parking lot. The hand going up. The woman stepping in. The 2 fingers rising. Then he rewound it and watched it again, and he did not look at Tae-sung at all. He looked at her. At the shaking hands pressed flat against her thighs. At the chin that did not drop. He smiled the way a man smiles when he finds a door he did not know existed. "Who is she?" he said. They had an answer by morning. Her name was Rebecca. She was 34, and she got up at 4 in the morning, 6 days a week, in a rented room with no elevator on the wrong side of the river. She rode the first subway with the other people who clean this city before it wakes up and pretends it was always clean. On the 15th of every month she sent almost everything she earned to a bank in Accra. Then she called her mother and made her voice bright and said the food here was wonderful, and yes, of course she was sleeping enough. And her mother would say, "And Kwame?" And Rebecca would say, "1 more year. Then he is a doctor and neither of us cleans anything ever again." Her younger brother was in his 4th year of medical school. He did not know how many hours were inside the money that arrived every month. There was one more thing about Rebecca, and it is the thing that put her in front of that raised hand. When she was 19, back home, there was a boy in the compound next door named Kofi. He was small and quiet and he stood very still in doorways, the way children stand when they are working out which room is safe. She heard things at night. Everyone did. And every morning the whole street agreed, without ever discussing it, that it was not their business. One evening she saw him on the step with a mark on his face shaped like a hand, and she opened her mouth, then looked at the door behind him, and closed her mouth, and went inside. 3 days later the boy was gone. Not moved away. Gone. Her grandmother sat with her while she cried, and did not say it was not Rebecca's fault, because that old woman did not lie to people she loved. She took Rebecca's face in both hands and said something Rebecca would carry across an ocean in 13 years. Listen to me. Blood cleans nothing. It only stains the floor that the children have to walk on. If you want to fix a thing, you do not fix it with your fists. You fix it by standing where the child can see you. And then she said, never look away again. Not once. Not for anyone. She made that promise at 19 years old, kneeling on a dirt floor. She had kept it in 3 countries and it had cost her 2 jobs. Standing in that parking lot, she had not been brave. She had simply been unable to break a promise made to a woman who was no longer alive to hear it kept. The promise saved a child that morning. The question was whether it was about to destroy her. 3 days later a car came for her. Not to hurt her, which was almost worse. She had spent those 3 days sleeping with a chair under her door handle, and instead there was a driver in a gray suit holding an envelope and saying, very politely, that there was an offer of employment. The house was in the hills, with a gate and a garden nobody used. And in that enormous house lived one small boy named Yijun. He had a bedroom the size of her entire apartment. A wall of toys, still in the boxes. A bookshelf where every spine lined up perfectly, because nobody had ever pulled a book out of it. And he had a habit that Rebecca noticed on the very first day, and could not stop thinking about that night. He apologized before he spoke. Not after. Before. Sorry. Is it time for lunch? Sorry. Can I have water? Sorry. He said it the way other children say excuse me, automatically, without hearing himself, and Rebecca stood in that beautiful kitchen with a cloth in her hand and felt something crack in her chest. She did not correct him. You do not fix a frightened child by telling him he is frightened. So she started answering the apology as though it had been a hello. Good morning to you too, sir, she said. Yes. It is time for lunch. The first time, he blinked at her. The second time, he almost smiled. On the 3rd day he came into the kitchen and said, sorry, then stopped, and looked at her, and started again. Good morning. Rebecca had to turn around and look very hard into a cupboard. She found the drawings by accident. She was cleaning under his bed and her hand touched a flat box pushed all the way to the wall. Inside were dozens of pictures, folded, hidden, the paper soft from handling. Every single one of them had the same thing in it. A house. A window. A woman with long hair who was always drawn slightly transparent, in yellow, the way children draw people they have been told are in the sky. The boy, inside. And a man. Always outside. Standing on the grass, past the fence, at the very edge of the paper. In some of them he was only a shape, half cut off by the border. Never once inside the house. Rebecca sat on that floor with the pictures in her lap and understood she had walked into something much older and sadder than a raised hand in a parking lot. Because a boy does not draw his father outside for no reason. And a man does not raise his hand to a child he was always cruel to. He raises it to a child he cannot look at. To understand why, you have to go back to a boy who was also 6 years old once, in a very different kind of house. Taesung grew up in 2 rooms behind a fish market. His mother worked nights. His father had left before there were memories to leave in. He was clever in the way hungry children are clever, which is to say he learned early that a boy who waits politely gets nothing at all. By 15 he was running errands for men who did not explain the errands. By 20 he had stopped asking. By 28, nobody in that district made a decision without knowing what he thought about it first. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, he met a woman named Jian. She sold flowers out of a bucket near the station. He bought some for no reason at all, and she laughed at how badly he was holding them, and he came back the next day so she could laugh again. She was the only person alive who was not afraid of him. "You should run," he told her once, sitting on a wall at 2 in the morning. "You know what I am. I know exactly what you are. You are a man who buys flowers he does not need from a girl who charges too much." They married in the spring. She wore his grandmother's ring, the only thing his family had ever owned that was worth anything, and she cried when he put it on her finger, then apologized for crying, then cried more. 2 years later there was a son. Taesung held that baby in a hospital corridor and made a promise. This boy would never be hungry. Never be afraid. Never stand in a doorway working out which room was safe. For 4 years he kept it. They were the best 4 years of his life. Then there was a phone call. His phone rang twice and he ignored it. Then it rang a 3rd time and something in him went cold. A taxi. A wet road, on the way to collect their son from his first day of school. A truck that did not stop. A driver who was never found. Paperwork that closed very quickly and very quietly. Accident, said the report. He believed that report for 11 months. Then a man who owed him a favor brought him a single photograph, and after that he never believed it again. But he could not prove it. And rage with nowhere to go does not disappear. It goes inward, and it goes downward, and eventually it lands on whoever is closest. The closest person in that house was 4 feet tall and had his mother's eyes. So he stopped looking at him. He filled a room with toys he never watched the boy open. He worked 18 hours a day so he would come home after bedtime, and he told himself it was for the boy, and it was not, and somewhere in there he became a man who raised his hand in a school parking lot because his son dropped a lunchbox and for 1 second looked exactly like her. That is not an excuse. There is no excuse. But it is the reason, and you need the reason to understand what happened next. Rebecca changed nothing in that house. That is what nobody expected, least of all the staff, who had watched 3 previous nannies arrive with schedules and charts and leave within a month. She made no speeches. She rearranged nothing. She just started noticing. He never ate the expensive food, so she made porridge, soft, the way you make it for somebody recovering from something. He sat by the window at the same hour every evening, so she sat on the floor nearby with a cloth in her hands and said nothing at all. At bedtime he lay very straight with his arms at his sides like a small soldier, so one night she told him about a tortoise from her grandmother's village who was too slow to run and too stubborn to give up. He did not react. The next night, as she stood to leave, a small voice said, "Sorry." She turned around. What happened to the tortoise? She sat back down. The first laugh came 11 days in, because she dropped a spoon and it bounced twice and landed in a bucket, and Yijun made a sound she had never heard him make. He clapped a hand over his own mouth, terrified. Rebecca crouched to his eye level. In this kitchen, laughing is allowed. I am the boss of this kitchen and that is the rule. Say it back to me. Laughing is allowed, he whispered. Louder. Laughing is allowed. There he is, said Rebecca, and she did not explain what she meant, and he did not ask. Then one evening Tae-sung came home early. In 4 years he had not done this once. He came through the door at 7 o'clock and stopped, because there was a noise in his house he did not recognize, and it took him several seconds to understand that the noise was his son. Yijun was standing on a chair with flour on his nose, and Rebecca was pretending to be outraged about something, and the boy was laughing so hard he had to hold the counter. Then the boy saw his father. The laughing stopped like a switch had been thrown. He climbed down off the chair, put his hands at his sides, and stood very straight. Sorry, he said. And Tae-sung, who had buried his own feelings so thoroughly he had forgotten where, felt something go through him like a blade. He turned and walked out. Rebecca found him 20 minutes later in the hallway, holding one of the drawings. She had left them on his desk. On purpose. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever done, and she had lain awake the whole night before deciding to do it. He did not look up. Explain this to me, he said quietly. You are looking at it. I am in every picture. Yes, sir. Outside every picture. His hand tightened on the paper. He is a child. Children draw nonsense. Children draw what they see, Rebecca said. Adults are the ones who draw what they wish. He turned, and there was something in his face that would have made grown men run for the door, and every muscle in Rebecca's body told her to move, and she stayed exactly where she was. You do not know anything about my son, he said. I know he says sorry before he says hello, she answered. I know he flinches at the sound of a car door. I know he has never once in his life been the reason his father came home early. She took a breath. And I know he did not put you outside that house because he hates you. Then why? Her voice did not rise. That was what broke him. Because that is where you have been. The hallway was silent for a very long time. Tae-sung looked down at the drawing. At the small figure on the grass. At the border of the paper cutting him in half. Get out of my house, he said. Yes, sir. She was at the top of the stairs when he spoke again. Not tonight, he said. Tomorrow. He likes the porridge. That night, for the first time in his life, that man stood outside his son's bedroom door. And he knocked. And waited for permission. A small startled voice said, yes. He opened the door and sat down on the carpet in a suit that cost more than a car, and said, can you show me how you draw the yellow one? The lady in yellow. I would like to learn. If that reached you somewhere in the chest, type, I am still here, in the comments right now, and tell us where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. Hit that like button and subscribe to Hidden Fortune Tales, because the next part is where everything changes. For 6 weeks that house came back to life. Not quickly. Not neatly. There were evenings when Tae-sung tried to speak to his son and could not find one word. But there was a night when the boy fell asleep against his father's arm on the sofa, and Tae-sung sat completely still for 2 hours rather than move him, and Rebecca watched from the doorway and then went to her room and cried into a towel so nobody would hear. And in an office across the city, a man with the blinds drawn was told all of it. The porridge. The laughing. The woman. He put down his cup. So that is how you kill a man now, he said. You do not shoot him. You wait until he has something again. He was the reason a taxi went off a wet road 8 years earlier. He had spent those 8 years waiting for Tae-sung to make a mistake, and Tae-sung never made one, because a man with nothing to lose is impossible to hurt. Now there was a woman in a gray uniform who had given him something back. So he did not go after Tae-sung. He went after her. It started so small that she doubted herself. Groceries bought that morning, spoiled by evening. All of them. In a locked apartment. Then a flat tire. Then two. Then a man in a gray car outside her building at 11 at night, and again the next night, and when she walked toward it, it pulled away without hurrying, which was worse. Then a note under her door, folded once. 4 words. Know your place, cleaner. Rebecca stood in that doorway holding it and understood, in a very calm and very cold way, that this was not about her at all. She was a message somebody was writing to somebody else. And she told nobody. Not Tae-sung. Not the staff. Not her mother, who was told the weather was lovely. Because she knew exactly what that man would do, and what it would cost the boy. So she started looking into it herself, which was the most dangerous decision in this whole story. She wrote down plates. She asked her building's guard for the visitor log. She photographed a face in a stairwell. Nobody watches a cleaner. That is the whole secret. People will discuss anything in front of a woman holding a mop. She got closer than she should have. And on a Tuesday night she came home from the house in the hills, turned onto her street, and stopped walking. 3 fire engines. Water running down the road, black with ash. Her building was standing. Her floor was not. They would not let her go up. She stood behind the tape and watched smoke pour out of the window of the room where she had slept for 4 years. Her passport. Her photographs. Her grandmother's headscarf, folded in a drawer, the only thing of hers Rebecca had left. And her brother's first anatomy notebook, the one he filled with terrible drawings of bones at 15 and posted to her the year she left, with a note on the first page saying, "Look. You did this. Gone." A firefighter told her they believed it started inside her apartment. Rebecca did not cry in front of them. She sat down on the wet curb in the same posture she had sat in that school parking lot, and said one sentence out loud to nobody. "You burned my grandmother's scarf." The question was not who did it. She knew who did it. The question was whether that fire was meant to frighten her, or to make sure she never came home at all. Tae-sung found out at 4 in the morning. She did not call him. One of his men saw her walk in with no bag, no coat, ash on her shoes, and by 5 o'clock Tae-sung was standing in his own hallway with a phone in one hand and a list of names in the other. Rebecca came down the stairs. She had seen this exact moment before, in her old street, in 100 doorways. The moment where a person decides that the only answer to pain is more pain. "You know who did it," she said. "I know exactly who did it. And you are going to go there tonight." "I am going to go there in 1 hour," he said, and he said it so gently that it was terrifying. "And there will be nothing left of him by morning. Not him. Not his brother. Not his house." He picked up his coat. Rebecca stepped into the doorway. Again. Second time in her life she had done it to that man, and this time she was not shaking. "Move," he said. "No, sir." "Rebecca." His voice cracked, and that was the first time she had ever heard it do that. "They burned your home. They killed my wife. They have taken everything, twice, and you are standing in my door telling me to do nothing? I am not telling you to do nothing. I am telling you not to do that. Give me one reason." And Rebecca said the thing an old woman had said to her on a dirt floor 13 years earlier, in the same voice it was given to her. Blood cleans nothing. It only stains the floor the children have to walk on. He stared at her. My grandmother told me that when I was 19. I have carried it across an ocean. Tonight I am giving it to you, and you can take it or walk past me, but you will hear the rest first. She pointed up the stairs, at a closed bedroom door. That boy lost his mother in one night. If you walk out of this house now, he loses his father too. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Because the man who comes back through that door will not be the one who sat on the carpet and asked how to draw the yellow one. Her voice finally broke. He will lose you twice. And the second time will be your choice. The coat was still in his hand. Outside, 3 cars were running in the driveway with men waiting inside them. Tae-sung stood in that hallway a long moment, and everything he had built in 20 years sat on one side of the scale, and a child's drawing of a house sat on the other. Then he took out his phone. And he called his lawyers. If your heart is pounding right now, do me one favor before the last part. Smash that like button, subscribe to Hidden Fortune Tales, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what the time is where you are, because I read every single one of them and I want to know who stayed for this. What happened over the next 4 months was not dramatic. It was paperwork. That is the part nobody puts in films, and it is the part that actually works. Tae-sung walked into a prosecutor's office with a briefcase, sat down, and began to talk. He gave them the taxi. 8 years of it. Names, dates, a driver who had been paid and relocated and was still alive in a coastal town under another surname. He gave them the fire. The gray car, the plates, the stairwell photograph. And he gave them himself. His lawyers fought for months over the terms and he lost more than he won, and when it was finished he was no longer a man anyone in that city was afraid of. He was a father with a record, a freight company, and a son who was learning to laugh in kitchens. The rival fought hard. Men like that always do. But the driver testified, the money left a trail, and a photograph taken in a stairwell by a woman with a mop put in the last nail. The verdict came down on a Thursday morning in autumn. The rival was sentenced to 22 years. And on the morning the verdict was read, Tae-sung was not in that courtroom. He was on a plastic chair at the back of a primary school classroom, at Parents' Art Day, watching a boy with a green crayon. Yijun was drawing a house. A window. A woman with long hair in yellow, standing in the garden, because some people stay in the garden and that is all right. A boy. A woman in a gray dress holding a bucket, which made sense to nobody in that room except the 2 of them. And a man. Inside. At the table. In the middle of the picture. Not cut off by the border. Tae-sung looked at that drawing for a long time, and a room full of parents very politely pretended not to see a grown man cry. Months later, there was an evening at the Han River. The water had gone gold and the bridges were coming on, and Rebecca was complaining about the price of the ice cream, and Tae-sung was not listening because his hand was in his pocket. He did not bring diamonds. He could have. He brought a small worn ring that had belonged to a woman who sold fish behind a market and never in her life owned 2 pairs of shoes. He was terrible at it. He started twice and stopped. I have been a coward in every way that matters, he said. I was not brave for my wife. I was not brave for my son. The first brave thing that ever happened in my life was a woman with a mop bucket telling me I would pay for it. Rebecca opened her mouth and nothing came out, which had never once happened before. I do not deserve a single thing you have done for us. But I would like to spend the rest of my life trying to. Behind him, a small boy who was supposed to be counting to 100 with his eyes closed had one eye open and both hands pressed over his mouth. She said yes. She said it about 4 times, and then she hit him on the arm for making her cry in public. 2 years later there was a baby girl. They let Yijun choose the name. He thought about it for 3 days with the seriousness of a small judge, then took part of his mother's name and part of Rebecca's grandmother's name and put them together, and asked very quietly if that was allowed. Rebecca had to leave the room. And on the day they brought her home, Taesung knelt on the hallway floor to put his daughter into his son's arms. Not because he was powerful. Not because anyone made him. Because a man who learns humility late learns it all the way down. There is one more thing. A year later, on an ordinary Tuesday morning in a school parking lot in the hills, a small boy dropped his lunchbox. It burst open. Rice went everywhere. The boy went red and started to cry and looked around for his mother, who was not there yet. And a taller boy, 9 years old now, walked over. He did not shout. He did not tell him to get up. He crouched on the concrete in his clean uniform and started picking up the rice, grain by grain. "It is fine," he said. "This happened to me here once. My mum says everybody drops things." He handed the lunchbox back and smiled. The little one wiped his face and smiled back, and there was no flinch in either of them, and neither of those 2 children had the slightest idea they were standing on the exact square of concrete where all of this began. That is what all of it was for. Not the courtroom. Not the ring. Not even the house. A boy who says hello before he says sorry, and who kneels to help instead of standing over someone. Somebody looked away from a child once, 13 years earlier and 6,000 miles away, and a boy named Kofi paid for it. Because one woman refused to look away again, another boy did not. Rebecca's grandmother said it best, so we will give her the last word. Blood cleans nothing. But standing where the child can see you changes absolutely everything. If you made it all the way here, answer me one thing. If you had been standing in that parking lot with your keys in your hand and everybody around you looking at the ground, would you have stayed silent? Or would you have stepped in front of that child the way Rebecca did? Be honest. And tell us where you are watching from and what time it is where you are, because it amazes me where these stories travel. Hit that like button, share this with somebody who needs reminding that one sentence from one ordinary person can change the direction of a whole life, and subscribe to Hidden Fortune Tales, because the next story is even harder to put down than this one.